Zelda goes native. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
The Amiga is dead.
Again.
Still.
Executing the N64.
And who are you going to call? The BBC.
All this and more coming up on this week's show. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech. Struth, good day, Dave.
Fair dinkum, Neil. Fair
It's like
dinkum.
Chris was back again there, wasn't it? I really enjoyed last week's show. Well done for hitting the button and getting Chris back on there. Really nice to hear from him. He seemed relaxed and enjoying life.
Yes. Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah, good chat last week. Let's talk about this week. What have you got coming up this week, Dave, in your retro life?
Oh, I've been picking out parts for my virtual pinball machine.
Which is now with you, or is it still en route?
Still on the way. It's been picked up from Liverpool, and it's with the guy who does all the deliveries, Martin. So it's in his warehouse, and rumour was he was going to deliver it last week. He didn't, but that's fine. So
it works on rumours, does it?
Yeah. I've not spoken to him. He does not answer my text messages. But that's fine. I'm not in a hurry. But I've started picking out parts for it and high-end graphics cards and all the rest of it. It's going to be amazing, Neil. Dead excited.
So you're going all in. I mean, what does it take to power a modern virtual pinball machine?
Well, I'm going to put a 4070 Ti Super in it.
That seems pretty extreme.
Yeah.
Why does it need that kind of power?
Because it's going to be 4K on a 43-inch monitor at 120 or 144 hertz.
Right. So high refresh to get that super smooth ball movement.
Yeah.
High resolution, yeah.
The whole thing is about trying to convince yourself it's real. So that's why the solenoids go on. So when you press the flippers, you feel you get the kind of the feedback from the table, the physical feedback rather than just a sound. So the whole thing is to convince you it's real, and the smoother it runs, the better. So I'm going all in on it.
Will you do something for me, Dave? Because of the dimensions, the profile of a pinball table, could you set it up so you can also flick through your TikTok videos?
Do you know, it probably could, because it's going to be Windows. Yeah. That's awful, Neil.
And it's
That's awful.
Portrait,
awful.
So you can have a TikTok pinball table.
I could just use the flippers for that, yeah.
Yeah. A world's first. That's what you wanted.
Ghastly.
Really.
Ghastly.
Well, I've got a fun week ahead. So this weekend, just a regular cave session on Saturday, which was really nice because the sessions are really selling well at the moment. As the weather heats up and you'd expect more and more people to want to be outside, they're coming into the air-conditioned corners of the cave and playing video games and the arcade as well. So that's really heartening, and hopefully it will continue that way.
I meant to ask, I've not been to the cave when it's a scorching hot day. Does the air conditioning cope even in those days?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes I set it too low and it's a bit chilly in there. So have to turn it back up again. So it really does work well. Same in the arcade, although the arcade's a lower down room, which means sometimes if you stand in the wrong place, you just get a face of icy cold air. So we try and position the machines so that you're not quite, it's lovely, but if you have the wrong height, it dries your eyeballs out. So you're trying to play a game and you're furiously blinking, trying to moisten your eyeballs.
Maybe stand with a water pistol and assist people.
Yeah, maybe.
Squirt it right in their eyes.
Mist people, yeah. And then the week ahead, really, really busy week ahead. So tomorrow, Hebrew are celebrating their 40th birthday, 40 years in the electronics industry. And they've dug out some really cool old stuff, one of which I really want to have a go on. In the 80s, they made a dartboard, an electronic dartboard, which would connect to a modem and dial up another dartboard. This thing appeared on Tomorrow's World. And they didn't have one until recently. They found a guy in Germany. I think he actually contacted them to say, can I get some help repairing it? And by the end of the conversation, Hebrew had bought it off of him. So they've managed to get themselves a dartboard back. The big difference about this compared to because there were other electronic dartboards of the time, is that this one uses a regulation board, and then the electronics somehow detect a regular dart in a regular dartboard and then count it up, and then through the modem. I think you can play it locally as well, so it's just electronic scoring. But if you had another one...
You can look at the board and see what's happened, yeah. Is that local?
Yeah, that local Dave. And then if you happen to have another one, you can dial it up remotely. So I would love to find another one. If anyone has a Heber electronic dartboard from the 80s,
Maybe
let us know.
why not you get Rob in and get him to not the other Rob that you're thinking about, Rob from the Board Folk, and get him to replicate it.
You could. It's from what I've seen in the back, it's multiple boards. There's this great big board on the back of the dartboard which uses magnetic fields to detect where the metal dart has gone.
Right.
I think it's probably worth a video, to be honest.
Magnetic fields.
Magnetic
Super
fields.
cartoons.
We need that. We need that magnetic fields intro music now. So maybe I'll do a video about that and other products they've done just to help them celebrate their 40th, because it's quite an achievement. Wednesday, we've got the BBC coming to do a segment on computer space. It's Points West, which is the local BBC channel. So that will be nice. And then Friday, we've got students from the local college's game development course. And I've got a couple of game developers coming to do a talk and inspire them. So it's a really, really busy day. And in amongst all of that, I've got to make a video as well. So busy week.
Busy week, yeah.
Really busy week. But I've always got time for you, Dave. Except last week.
Anything, I know, well, yeah. Anything planned for the weekend for yourself is a treat then? Because it sounds like you need something to look forward to.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I missed that out. Saturday is a Sky Skipper event in the Cave and Arcade. So that's an all-day event. And then Sunday, regular public sessions. So, yeah.
So, absolutely no treats for you.
Well, going to the cave is always a treat.
I know, working will be a treat, but you'll need, yeah.
Maybe not such a treat for Lily, who often has told me now she started listening to This Week in Retro.
Hello, Lily.
Spend some time with me. So, hi, Lily. Hope you're well.
I've met Lily. She's very nice. I like Lily.
There you go. Right. Are we all caught up, Dave? Should we go into this week's stories?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
I'm quite enjoying picking stories recently that discuss the death of the Amiga. And it's not because I actually believe the Amiga is dead. It's not. It's alive now. Maybe it died. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it was just having a sleep. It doesn't matter. But I enjoy saying the Amiga is dead just for fun.
I mean, the Amiga did die at some point, surely.
It certainly had a period in which there was almost no activity on it. There was some faithful few who were on it, but the compared to what happened in 2000 and wherever it was, when all of a sudden it came back it rose from its grave, it had a period where it was either very much asleep or dead. Yeah,
it's often assumed that Commodore folded in 94, the Amiga was dead. But you mentioned 2000 there. I agree. It's that early 2000 to 2010 maybe period where it just, not old enough to be retro. The ones that hung on till the end of the late 90s have finally let go. And then we all got nostalgic again for it.
Yeah. And if you were at a car boot sale in 2005, you could have got Amigas for next to nothing. You could have filled a container with them and made a fortune on them. There are two themes when talking about why the Amiga died. There's two themes. One is blaming it on the blundering mismanagement and competitive fiefdoms within Commodore, resulting in its failure. And the other is to blame John Carmack for refusing to port Doom to the Amiga, claiming that it wasn't capable. And this week's story is thanks to Rich2600, and it asserts that id's Doom did not kill the Amiga. No, Wolfenstein 3D did. And it's a video from Modern Vintage Gamer. The video tells the story of the Amiga and then games like Wolfenstein, going on to discuss Doom as well. And it's a great video for people who don't know the history or who know a bit of it, or in fact, if you know the history, it's still a great video. He goes on to discuss the Doom clones the Amiga did get, and how generally they're not very good. There's a couple of exceptions there. And there's even one that does look pretty good on a stock Amiga 500. His point, though, is that even by 1992, computer graphics were evolving and the Amiga didn't. And AGA was not enough, and it didn't do anything significant enough. Now, I do agree with everything that Dimitri has said in the video, but I think I want to add a little bit more depth So for me, it wasn't Wolfenstein 3D that did it for me. And Neil and I chatted about it on Twitter when someone linked a video and asked us what was it that moved you on. And for both of us, it was the same answer. It was Ultima 7. But it's fundamentally the same thing. It wasn't Wolfenstein 3D, but it was a game that we saw on a PC that we couldn't do ourselves.
Yeah. In my case, with Ultima 7, it was, there's one for the Ultima count there, Duncan. It wasn't even seeing the game on anyone else's computer. It was a glossy Origin Systems magazine that came, I don't even know what magazine it came in, but for some reason I had this, and it, when I looked to see what system it would be available on, it just said PC, and my heart sank. So it was the power of Origin's printed marketing that really killed it for me.
But also, Neil, you had played Ultima 6 on your Amiga, which is, as far as I know, the same experience as me playing it on my ST. How was the experience of playing Ultima 6 on your Amiga?
Well, it was a big box game. It had the cloth map. It had all the guides and trinkets inside. So that experience was great. Came on 3 discs. So like any other Amiga game, you put it in and you think, okay, the game's going to load. No, it pops up and it says, have I can't even remember how many blank discs on hand, because we're going to decompress the game from these discs into your blank discs and you're going to play it from them, which wasn't an unusual way of thinking. In the earlier days of computing and gaming, you would always be advised to take a backup, use the backup, keep the master disk safe. So that wasn't super unusual, but it felt a bit cheap that you were having to use your own discs once it had decompressed. Obviously, if you had a hard drive, you could install it and that would be a lot better. But I didn't. I had 2 floppy drives, and even with 2 floppy drives, there was an enormous amount of disk swapping, primarily when the music changed. The music was on a separate disk. So I played a lot of the game with the music disabled, and I was finding all these ways of trying to reduce floppy disk swapping. So it was a bit painful, Dave, but I did find plenty of enjoyment in the game regardless. But as a precursor to Ultima 7, it was pretty obvious you weren't going to be able to take that next step up to the graphical enhancements of Ultima 7, the music, the size of the world. That just wasn't going to happen on Amiga, I don't think.
Yeah, and I had the same experience. So, again, not Wolfenstein for me, but for me, I could see the ST couldn't really do it anymore in the games I wanted to play. And you might be into FPS games, you might be into RPG games, but same thing. Porting Wolfenstein and Doom to the Amiga would at least mean a complete rewrite. And on top of that, they'd need to find clever tricks they perhaps weren't already aware of. And even then, they would run pretty poorly unless you had a very powerful system. For Ultima 7, even if we could manage Ultima 7 on my Atari ST, it would disk swap hell. And then, of course, it came to Ultima Underworld, also in 1992, also in the same year as Wolfenstein 3D. You'd never get that on an ST, so it was switching time for me. Neil, what do you think?
Well, first of all, the video, great video. MVG always gets straight into the meat of his video. They're normally around about 10 minutes or so long, a lot of them. This one's a chunky 16 or 17 minutes, and you know why that is. It's because he is an Amiga man through and through. He knows his stuff. He loves the Amiga like the rest of us, and he really got into this video. Now, we're talking about 1992 with Wolfenstein, which was actually a great year for the Amiga, and he touches on some games in his video, some other games that I can think of from that year, which I loved. Jaguar XJ220. I bet you love that one, Dave, being a Jag man.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. You've got an XJ220, haven't you?
I've got an XE.
Oh, okay. Just not quite. Not quite.
I do also have Jaguar XJ220 in my hand.
Oh, look at that. Incredible music on that game.
It's a great game.
It's a great game, but it wasn't really breaking the mold. It was just a very good example of a sprite scaling racing game. Flashback, the sequel to Another World, which was another wonderful game. Again, not breaking the mold, just the pinnacle of that sort of game. Pinball Dreams. Why are you buying a virtual pinball table, Dave, when you could just be playing Pinball Dreams on an Amiga?
Well, he does mention Pinball Dreams in his video, and it says it really pushed the limits of the Amiga. But I've played that in my Amstrad CPC.
Oh, you have? Yeah, the modern version, the modern release of the CPC. Now,
obviously, that didn't come out back in the day, but if the CPC can do it, how can you then see the same games pushing limits on the Amiga?
True, but it couldn't do it at the time, could it? It's using more modern methods to make it happen on the CPC, the accumulated knowledge. Now, let's talk about Wolf 3D. He talks about the impact of it appearing in 1992, but what he goes on to say is that Wolf 3D made the PC an incredible games machine overnight. That's the message. Now, I think that's a bit debatable because I think the PC was already a great games machine before 1992. And I know why he's doing it. The emphasis is to highlight how different Wolfenstein 3D felt compared to things that came before it. But I don't agree that it overnight became a great machine. Dave?
It got to be a subjective thing based on your own perspective and the games you like to play. If you like platform games and you like shooters and that type of thing, you'd probably be right because the PC was still struggling trying to get scrolling on platformers working right. And the platform games in the PC were falling really quite short of what you would see on consoles. So perhaps there. But if you were into strategy games, you were into RPG, you were into adventure games, the PC was already the best platform.
Yeah, I understand why he's saying that, but I just thought I'd point that out. He also talks about the chunky versus bit planes graphics modes, which is basically that on the PC with chunky modes, you could address each pixel on the screen, and that was really needed to achieve that pseudo 3D effect of a game like Wolfenstein 3D and make it work at a usable speed. The Amiga was still using bit planes, and that method was a throwback to the original Amiga 1000, the technology that was available at the time in the mid-80s, the technology that kept it affordable. They made some compromises. They settled on bit planes. And he's right. By 1992, the Amiga really should have moved on. Maybe not the Amiga 500. Okay, we get it. That was a budget version. That goes back to 87, 88, whenever the 500 came out. But 92, by the end of 92, that's when the new generation, the Amiga 1200, the AGA systems came out. And that really should have been better than it was. You could argue it should have moved on from bit planes. If you'd just done a blanket move, of course, you would have broken compatibility with that back catalogue, which was important. But, there must have been a way of doing it. Maybe an extra custom chip or something, some way of supporting it. Anyway, it didn't happen. So the Amiga was still on bit planes, even with the 1200. But what the video does show, which was really interesting for me, was the wake of Wolfenstein's release and certain Amiga games that try to emulate the style. For example, Jurassic Park on the Amiga 1200 had a FPS section. It wasn't on the 500, it was on the 1200. It was windowed, it was small, it was a low frame rate. It was trying to imitate Wolf 3D in its style. And there were various games that tried to add this kind of gameplay element, and it just really highlighted that the new AGA Amiga platform, still using bit planes, even the CD32, which had the Akiko chunky to plain custom chip added in there, it was still creating a bottleneck, this whole approach, and it just wasn't possible. Now, I say it wasn't possible at the time, just like the CPC game that you mentioned, with the accumulated knowledge over decades, people have found ways to make it possible, even on a stock Amiga 500. There's, what's the one that came out last year, the crazy Amiga 500 Doom clone?
I know the one you mean. I can't remember the name.
Is it Dread? Something like that.
Grind. They're all similar. They're all
Grinder, did you say?
No, I did not say Grinder. I said Grind. That was a bit Freudian of you.
You can play that on your pinball table as well, Dave. Anyway.
I just think your wife will be listening to this. She'll be appalled at you.
And then in 1993, Doom came along, okay? That was the big one for me. For me personally, Wolf 3D didn't actually have that much of an impact on me when I saw it. I thought it was neat. I thought it looked pretty sparse, and I found the game a little bit dull. Is that fair? Now, I don't know if that was how you feel, or if that was just me being a stubborn Amiga owner in denial. Maybe I was just happy with the games that I had at the time, didn't pay too much attention to it.
It was fun to play Wolf 3D. It was much more fun to play Doom. Doom was that Wolf 3D felt a little bit like the proof of concept, and then Doom was like them saying, we've proved it works, now let's see what we can do. And in fact, Doom is, I would argue, Doom is a complete polished game with no missing parts. No, we couldn't do this well enough, so you'll just have to live with that. No, it's aged extremely well because of it. Wolfenstein 3D hasn't aged as well because it's not just as good. It's a bit sparse, as you say. It's not quite as, yeah.
So for me, it's really Doom was the one that blew my mind when I saw it, and I couldn't get hold of that and a PC quick enough to play it. So in my mind, the video is correct in the impact of Wolf 3D, but it wasn't an overnight thing. It was the fuse that was being lit, I think, with Wolf 3D. And then that fuse went all the way through to Doom when my friends... I don't remember any of my friends looking at Wolf 3D and saying, oh my God, have you seen this game? You've got to get it when it came out. But they did with Doom. That's when people started saying that.
For me, how about we say Ultimate Underworld and then X-Wing?
Yeah, I mean, Ultimate Underworld came out before Doom, didn't it?
Yeah, Ultimate Underworld came out 1992. Amazing 3D perspective game. And then X-Wing, same idea. Yeah, you wouldn't get those. In fact,
it was more advanced, Ultimate Underworld. It had slopes.
Yeah.
You could look up and down. It was more advanced, but I guess it wasn't as mainstream and as exciting as running around with a shotgun and blowing up imps.
It was certainly mainstream, though. It was very popular, but yeah, it wasn't the same thing. It was an evolution of flick screen dungeon crawlers.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think you could call anything mainstream in 1992, 93 on a PC. Mainstream would be a Mega Drive, a Super Nintendo, in certain parts of the world, an Amiga, but really the consoles.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah. So there's two stories here, really. There's the technical impact, and then slightly later, the consumer impact, which I think came with Doom. And that's when people could say, okay, even with zero technical knowledge, I can sense that this game, Doom, will never be possible on my Amiga. And that was just as important to the demise of the Amiga, a loss in consumer confidence.
Just the idea, and I think this is what we've been saying all along, the idea that the games you want to play, you'll have to upgrade your system again. And we were already used to that. We'd already seen, even if the Amiga was your first computer, you would already be aware that other computers had come before it. We'd both upgraded from a CPC. Well, I'd upgraded. You couldn't go sideways to your Amiga. And then, I'm joking. And then we'd go on and upgrade to the PC, and then from then on it'd be upgrades every 6 months, little upgrades. So yeah. For me, though, the Amiga shouldn't be looking at what it can't do. Plenty that it can, and there are masses of games and genres that exist both from back in the day to modern games. There's plenty to play. Did it die? Maybe, but that doesn't matter. It's not dead anymore. The Amiga community is alive and well. And shall we make this question of the week? What game made you change system?
I would love that. I think that's a great question. Yeah,
that's what we'll do.
So get thinking.
Yeah. What game made you change system? We are sponsored by Pixel Addict magazine. Thank you very much for sponsoring us.
Thank you, guys.
Issue 20. They're already issue 20. Wow. Issue 20 is out, and it has When Gaming Got Serious as their cover story. And they're talking about how the games industry matures. So they're talking about how they went from things like Monty Mole to things like Floor 13, nuclear war, corruption. So they talk to Andrew Morris from Magnetic Fields and Roberta Williams, Terry Lloyd from Gremlin Graphics, John Hare from Sensible Software, and they'll talk about how games got serious. So that's a very interesting topic, one we've not talked about here.
Yeah, I think we'll probably see quite a lot of Roberta Williams in the coming months because Sierra have got a new documentary they're working on. So I think the hype machine will be geared up soon, but always nice to hear from her. They also cover classic computer hardware, the Philips Video Pack G7000, the Victor 2HR, and the Amstrad PC 1640 in this issue.
Wonderful cheap machine, yeah.
Yeah.
And the A400 Mini, the Atari A400 Mini, lots of stuff.
Bit slick this week, Dave, this advert.
Yeah, so where do they go to get this?
Stupid.
What's the website? Pretend you don't know the website.
Oh, Dave, you've caught me out. You joker.
Pixel.addict.media. You can order it to be delivered to your house, or you can order it to be delivered electronically through the magic of electronic mail You
I
can
use the
get
milkman. He drops it off for me.
a PDF in your email. Pixelatic Media, thank you very much.
Let's talk about the N64 now. The Nintendo 64 has always been a tricky system to accurately emulate. Its hardware was developed by Nintendo with silicon graphics, and it resulted in a unique system which utilizes hardware and techniques, some of which stuck around and others were dropped because in console terms, this was the very first generation of gaming machine with 3D capabilities at the forefront. It was made to be a 3D games console. So as a result, some of the techniques, some of the hardware, some of the approaches were smart. Others were just the best that could be achieved at the time with what was available, and then would be quietly dropped in later generations. As a result, what you had in the N64 was effectively an SGI workstation, an embedded version of one of their workstations, an Indie perhaps, and the Indie was actually used as the development system for this. That meant it was tricky to emulate, or to emulate accurately. And for some time, the N64 became the holy grail of emulation. Who would do it first? Who would do it best? And there were some stunning breakthroughs along the way. In the early days, we had emulators such as Ultra HLE, which provided high-level emulation, and it utilized the 3DFX cards that we had at the time to give a completely playable experience, but only with a very select few titles. I think even before Ultra HLE, we had, was it called Project Reality? Might have even been the very first one. But that just ran a few homebrew things, and then HLE came along and just blew it wide open in the games that it could run. And this understandably upset Nintendo, as this was 1999, and the console was still in the shops. It was, I think it was January or February 99, so it was early 99 that this came out.
Does this sound familiar, Neil?
Does it sound familiar? Why does this sound familiar?
Nintendo being angry that people are emulating things that are still in the shops.
That's a given, isn't it? That's a given. Yeah, I mean, it was really impressive to see. I remember being blown away by it. But the search for accurate and complete emulation of the system would still take many, many years. And emulators such as Project 64 would carry the torch, as well as developers of plugins for things like Project 64 to utilize different graphics techniques, sound systems, drivers, things like that, to try and make it as accurate as possible. And in time, with the help of these extremely talented people, things did improve. But no matter how accurate the emulation became, there was always a niggle there. It not only accurately emulated games eventually, it also emulated the slowdown, the low resolution textures, and the less than ideal control methods in N64 games of the period. All things that you would have experienced on the real thing. And that's when developers decided to go even further than accurate emulation. That wasn't enough for them. And so we moved into the world of decompilation. In fact, before that, the emulators evolved to allow you to have higher resolutions, different types of filtering. There were ways of improving your N64 games within the emulators, but then we moved to decompilation. And in 2023, a monumental effort, which I think began in 2019, it took that long, was completed, and that was to reverse engineer Mario 64. And what it delivered was the source code for that one game. So now you could compile a PC native version of Mario 64, add things like RTX support, use modern graphics drivers on your PC, completely alter the control systems to control like a more modern game, and have higher resolutions. And this all ran natively on your PC. It was just an executable. Now, the project also revealed that the original Mario 64 game wasn't completely optimized. So this is really nice. Lessons were learned from this process, fed back into the N64 version, and you ended up with an N64 native version that ran on real hardware, of course, with things like, well, there was even a 2-player split screen version added and better frame rates and all of this. So a really valuable process and a valuable two-way process. But that was just one game. So let's fast forward now all the way to this week, where we saw the release of N64 Recomp, which you might assume is the same decompilation sort of process as Mario, but you'd be wrong. This is witchcraft. So this hasn't been done by hand. This isn't someone poring over Mario and manually decompiling the game. This takes an N64 game ROM and it automatically converts it to C source code in minutes. It doesn't take the 5 years that Mario took. This thing is just super quick, converts it into C source code, then you can natively run it, compile it, run it on your PC. And it's already resulted in people playing, for example, the Zelda N64 Zelda at 90 frames per second on their Steam Decks, which is crazy. And the dev says that this will work with the whole library, albeit there are one or two games where there are certain tweaks needed to, certain hacks that certain games used to use the hardware in odd or unusual ways. But that's fine. You get your source code, tweak it a little bit, and then you compile it. So what we non-technical folk can hope to expect from this whole thing is a series of compiled executables out there, of course. Always better if you can compile your own. Be careful of viruses and things like that. Downloading
Absolutely
executables.
Never compiling anything myself.
But there'll be executables out there that we can just simply pair up with the ROM. So you'll download your waverace64.exe, put the ROM in the same folder, and it will take the game assets from the ROMs. So these executables can be legally distributed. There's no copywritten assets with them. It will take the assets from the ROM, it will run natively on the PC, and you can have all of the quality of life and visual enhancements and frame rate enhancements that you could wish for that the developers have decided to add into this. And yes, that even means Superman 64 for those who really want to play that on their PC.
What enhancements would be needed to make that any good?
Yeah, let's brush over that. I don't think there's anything that can really save it. Dave, has science gone too far?
No, it's only going to get better. Our world of retro is going to have things not only that we don't think are possible, but that we haven't even thought about. I would never have predicted the automatic decompilation and recompilation of old games. Never would have thought about it. For as much as we like to be period correct with the best and most true to the time hardware to play games to get the best possible experience, on the other hand, it's not the case that these games were as best as they could be. They had to compromise. In Dimitri's video that we were talking about earlier about the death of the Amiga, he talks about 15 frames per second in Quake on a souped-up PowerPC Amiga, and probably 15 FPS was fine for all of us at the time. We'd get used to it. But these days, we want higher resolutions. We want 60 frames per second to play the old games nicely. 15 frames per second would to us now feel a bit of a slideshow. So I'm very much for source ports, for enhancements and improvements, and the idea of doing it automagically with these things is amazing. Especially once we're out of the pixel art era of gaming, where it's difficult to enhance that properly. Maybe you can if you can enhance the frames per second, then fantastic, but that's difficult because so many things are based in frames of animation. But once we're out of that pixel art era, and it comes to 3D games in particular, we're dealing with the games doing the best they can, as many frames a second as they can, textures that look bad.
Yeah, even in this, obviously you have your 3D worlds on the N64, but there are often 2D sprites. For one example it gives in Zelda is the waterfall that flows down the side of a cliff is actually a 2D sprite flowing down there. But even with this system, it takes the 2D animations and it interpolates them and fills in the blanks to give you a 60 frame per second waterfall rather than just a 60 frame per second world and then what would look like a chunky, blocky sort of low frame rate waterfall. It even goes that far, or flickering flames on torches or whatever, things like that. So it's pretty advanced stuff.
Yeah, I mean that is a huge advantage. I'm sure people will argue for purism and to play the games exactly as they are. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to say you're right or you're wrong, but for me, where the games were already doing just the best they could, and you could see the seams and all the rest of it, then this kind of enhancement is great. I'm thinking about games like Morrowind and Oblivion and other RPGs where Neverwinter Nights, all the rest of it, where that kind of automatic enhancement could be great.
Yeah, it's absolutely not a replacement for emulation, but it's a lovely way of playing these games, and it certainly keeps them alive. For example, there's no reason why this can't. Well, Nintendo is the reason, but technically, Nintendo could give it its blessing, and tomorrow you could have N64 Mario or Zelda on Steam. You could pay for it, you could download it. it will help Nintendo to put some of their older games on the Switch and things like that if they really wanted to. So it opens up a whole world.
If Nintendo are listening, I'm sure they are. Everyone listens to this.
They always do.
Nintendo are listening. Why not let it happen on Steam and then you sell the add-ons for it? Because there are lots of things now on Steam where the base thing is free, but you have to pay for it. There's a Pinball FX, for example, on there. There is the Capcom collection on there where the basic thing is free and then you buy the add-ons for it. So you could put this on Steam and then you could sell people the Mario bit for it so they could play Mario or Zelda and all the other Nintendo 64 games. There you go, Nintendo. And I want a bit of commission for that.
Ease of use is really what sells on these platforms, because we can all spend time illegally hunting for ROMs and games, downloading.
I couldn't do that personally.
No, morally we couldn't do that.
No.
But technically, people could do that. Whereas if it's just 2 clicks on Steam or whatever platform that you use, the Nintendo Store, and then another click to say, I want to download that game. I want to download that game, and it's 50p or £1. People would do it all day long. But yeah. I can't imagine seeing Nintendo doing that very, very soon outside of their own ecosystem, which they do. There are Super Nintendo games and things like that on the Switch store. But yeah, maybe one day. Anyway, retro, what was it called again, Dave? N64 Recomp. That's what it's called. Go and look it up. Try it out. Look out for those native N64 games. Turn RTX on and see how you get on. Let us know. Oh, Dave's housekeeping.
Lots and lots of housekeeping this week. First of all, Neil spotted this. It is incredibly touching. It is from Vox Orion, and it's a submission to the subreddit, which is actually quite popular. And it says, "What does this week in retro mean to you?" It is. I read it, and I had a tear in my eye reading it. Really, it's. I don't know. The three of us put a lot of effort in, but the result seems to be more than the sum of its parts. What comes out at the end is amazing. I'm happy to take part in it, but the idea that even a handful of people get some real pleasure, it's part of their routine on a Saturday, is something to look forward to, or even it's something they enjoy spending time with someone else with listening to, is amazing. But we have over 10,000 people a week listening. It's mind-blowing.
It was a really lovely message, and I enjoyed reading it too. And I get it, but I get it because I listen to other podcasts, and I feel like I'm part of that little family. You know, I feel like I know the presenters. I love to listen to them every week. But it didn't occur to me that applies to our listeners and people listening to us too. So, it's quite mind-bending to think about it. But thank you so much. It was Vox Orion, wasn't it, who put that message up there? Yeah. Thank you. Really did enjoy reading that. So what else have we got in Dave's briefs and housekeeping today? Prefim asked if all the viewers, he's put in a request, can all the viewers submit a video of them waving to be added to the show so that when we say he's waving, all of the viewers can appear waving? That's one for Duncan. Duncan, let us know if we can do that. Maybe we can set up a OneDrive or something where people can drop their videos, and it'd be nice for a Christmas special or something, wouldn't it? Instead of a show from us, you can just have an hour of people waving.
I'm just imagining tiles of people waving appearing on the screen, and each one getting smaller and smaller so they can all fit on.
We'll have to vet them to make sure they are all waves and not.
We'll make it small enough it wouldn't matter. Just deny it. Oh, no, that was a wave. Yeah.
That was a wave.
No one would do that to us, would they?
No, surely not.
Dr. Local has submitted a link to a Reddit AMA, which is Ask Me Anything, from a former CEX employee. There's nothing too shocking in there, and sadly nothing about the repairs. How's that mystery shopping going, Neil?
Do you know what? I've completely forgotten to do it, so I am going to do that. This was for people who weren't listening. CX have started offering retro repairs, and I said I'm going to dig something out, take it down there, and see what their fixed rate of, what was it, £40 or whatever they were charging, see what that turns into. I promise I will do that. I must dig something out this week.
So CX are a UK, although they are worldwide, but most densely in the UK, second-hand games and console reseller. They'll buy your stuff from you so you can spend it on drugs, and then they'll sell it to other people who don't wash. That was the premise of the AMA. Yes, it's a lot of junkies, and yes, it's a lot of people that don't wash. That's what the smell is. That's what the answer to the AMA was.
Brilliant. Emulation on the iOS ecosystem is taking off since Apple lifted restrictions on the platform. We talked about this recently, and Paul, aka Hermsky, has shared with us the news that RetroArch is now available. RetroArch, is now available for your Apple devices, opening up the entire world of emulation options. So that's good news for retro fans, and I think we saw our very own Chrissy trying it out on his TV last week, didn't we?
Yeah. I tried to define FPGA versus emulation, or at least I tried to avoid going into too much depth because I didn't want to be wrong and get picked apart. But there's a very interesting and more detailed discussion on the subreddit started by Svenska Baronen. So there's a bit of fun in trying to work out how you define a software emulator without also describing Mr. or the other way around, without saying things that are wrong.
Also, the topic of games on radio came up in last week's show with Chris and Dave. And Dave, following that show, I think you had a message from a friend, didn't you?
Yeah, so Arek, my friend Arek grew up in Poland, and he explained that there was a scout section in radio which did broadcast software at night time, and he says it was state-allowed piracy. And he then found a link as a Polish article written about it, which I will link in the show notes, and you can use Google Translate if you're not fortunate enough to speak Polish. But it's fascinating what was going on behind the in the east of Europe, behind the Berlin Wall and all the rest of it, where they just didn't have the same consumer stuff that we did. It wasn't available for retail, so all that you had was piracy.
Behind the Iron Curtain.
That was what I was looking for.
What you were looking for. I could see you searching. Yes, yeah. And our good friend Electron Ash, also on the same topic, recalls Amstrad and Spectrum games being broadcast over FM radio in the UK. But he also talks about a light sensor method. So this is something I've read about also. I don't remember seeing it myself, but I've read about it. You could get a magazine which would teach you how to build your own light sensing box, which stuck, I think it even had a suction cap, and it would stick in the corner of your TV screen. During the broadcast, a little square would flash in that corner of the screen. That was your ones and zeros. And then that would come down the cable into the back of your computer, listening for the input. And then at the end of the show, you could run it and you would get a simple program. So radio waves, lights flashing, vinyl records, all sorts of alternative ways of distributing software. I always find that fascinating.
Yeah, and it's funny how it passed me by. I never did any of these. I was never aware of them happening, but clearly they were. On to briefs now, and waka waka waka, or as Aphex Twin put it, eat 'em up yum yum, eat 'em up yum yum. And to make you feel old, that Aphex Twin song is from 1992, which is 32 years ago, when Pac-Man was already old and out of date, but only 12 years old. So it's now twice as many years between that.
We've been working on the Pac-Man cabinet in the arcade archive because we've got one sat there, and I keep saying, you can't have an arcade museum without Pac-Man. You've got to fix it. So Holly has been working on that. We had life in it. On Saturday, we actually had Pac-Man up on the screen. Did have to replace the screen because the CRT was completely destroyed.
I saw that on Twitter. It was really, really marked with... the
burning was bad. But, I mean, even with burning, it might have still been usable. But no, it was... parts of it, when you looked at it from the back, parts of the neck were like bent, I think she said. Actually had some physical damage. Holly doesn't give up easily, so she'll probably put that to one side and have a crack at that CRT. But for the purpose of getting Pac-Man running, we are fortunate enough to have a stack of new old stock arcade CRTs. So brand new one in there. It'll be the crispest original, that's hard to say, arcade CRT Pac-Man in the country, I reckon, with that in there. Without an LCD screen.
No. Well, Pac-Man is 44 years old on the 22nd of May. So it's a few days from now, but it's when you're listening to this, it'll be in the past. And to celebrate, Happy has released will be releasing his own Spectrum port of Pac-Man RX, which is actually incredibly good and close to the arcade game. There were, of course, lots of Spectrum ports of it, but none of them anything like as good as this. So link in the show notes.
It's funny, isn't it? Back in the day, if Pac-Man came out for your Spectrum, unless it was the very early days, I think I would have turned my nose up a little bit and gone,
that's right.
That's an old game.
Yeah.
That 4-year-old game, that's an old game. I'm not playing
disgusting.
But now it's like, yeah, great. We've got an arcade perfect Pac-Man on the ZX Spectrum. X Battle Station has posted a link to the Lemmings 90s dance track. So if you really want to assault your ears, we had all sorts of wonderful video game music remixes, from Tetris to Mortal Kombat to whatever else in the charts. Certainly in the UK. I wonder if they entered the charts in other countries. Did the Lemmings 90s dance track enter the charts where you're from? I'm sorry to say, Dave, I actually have this Lemmings track on cassette tape in the cave.
You should do a video of burning it. It's awful. The Pac-Man one I mentioned, I quite enjoy, but not the Lemmings one. Nothing to do with Lemmings. The Lemmings is such a fantastic game. It shouldn't be besmirched by this terrible tune. Fiskit lets us know that Outrun AGA for the Amiga is one step closer. It really does look tremendous in the update.
Nostalgia Nerd has released a video all about the topic of why we moved away from the 4:3 aspect ratio. A wonderful in-depth video from him, as always. And just as an aside, I noticed a couple of days ago, he was just posting and celebrating the first year of Barcadia has been complete. So successful year for him.
42 has linked a story from Time Extension about the wacky Atari music machine thing that
video
visualizer. Yeah,
some familiar pictures in this article.
Did they come from you? Did they?
They've come from my channel. Yes.
Yeah.
They also credited them.
They also did use Control Art Reese's video. They linked that in the magazine, in the article there. Great video he did. So this is a visualizer before Atari really got into. Before Atari got a name for them for gaming consoles. You plugged your music in and it plugged into your telly, and you got to see some kind of trippy visualizations that you might see in Winamp a few years later on your screen. And it also references that Atari were infamous for taking lots of drugs when you worked there. But unfortunately, no mention of hot tubs. There's a podcast that we sometimes mention called the Ted Dabney Experience. Fantastic podcast, a proper one, unlike this one, where they do proper research and all the rest of it. And they're always asking, as a little bit of a joke, anyone that worked at Atari, tell us about the hot tubs. And so far, I think nobody has told them about the hot tubs.
1977 was the video music system, so Atari were known for their video games. The VCS had only just come out, so not so much in the home. But certainly known for their arcade games. Boolean Boyo has posted about Rob Smith. He's got the cure to reading and writing discs from different systems, including the Amiga, the ST, and older PC formats on a modern PC. So you'll remember that Rob Smith did the drawbridge system, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which allowed us to, his big breakthrough, which nobody thought would be possible, was to run Amiga floppy disks natively on the UAE emulator, put a disk in, read and run a real Amiga game in real time. And now he's furthered all of that knowledge and all of that work he's done. So very soon, whether it's with a drawbridge or a grease weasel, we'll be able to use his system to just write. It's now. It's out now. As soon as now.
The future is now.
As soon as now. No, that wasn't the cure. You'll be able to. I mean, this is great for retro fans because having a separate tower system with an old operating system and an old disk drives and just trying to have something to allow you to write all these formats is a bit of a pain. And now you'll be able to just do it on a modern PC. So well done, Rob Smith. He makes a huge contribution to the retro scene.
Yeah. Yeah, and he does things that you would think that's not possible, and then just goes away and does it. And the final one we'll cover is from Grant Me Strength, and it's the first computer game type-in. Is 49 years old today. Not quite sure when the date was. I always get type-ins wrong, and as you were talking about radio broadcasts, I'm thinking that would have been a great way. In the magazine, it says, here's the type-in, or listen at 3:45 a.m. on channel such and such and record it. That would have been great for type-ins.
We'll have to set up a pirate radio station, Dave, on the AM band that broadcasts
Sea shanties
games. Just see if anyone...
What do you do with a drunken sailor? You've got the accent for it.
Arr.
There is loads and loads more in the subreddit. Way too much to discuss. Have a look there if you want to fill in some time. But thank you very much for everyone that submitted stories. It's no secret that I love strategy games. One of my favourite games is XCOM, also known as UFO Enemy Unknown. And unlike the previous games from the same producer, Julian Gollop, this one has a strategic management part to it. So it's not just a scenario where you go in and then the game's over. You run a worldwide network with bases and you send your soldiers out to individual scenarios. It's then turn-based. And of course, that game is massively popular. It's been remade a couple of times officially, and then there's sequels to those. And games like Jagged Alliance and the original Fallout owe lots to it, surely. But if I'm going back in my memory to a strategy game that was kind of like it, and I'm going to say Ghostbusters. And you might be thinking I'm being silly, and I kind of am. I'm really stretching it, but I'm also not. The 8-bit Ghostbusters game saw you buy the equipment for your car and then send your car out to bust ghosts in New York City, building up funds and getting better at it, trying to slow down the PK meter. In fact, across different games, because once you finished a game, you would be able to use a code to give yourself more money in the next one and the next restart. And it really helped catch the feel of the film. In fact, do you remember, Neil, what it did at the very start of the game?
It played the music, and then I know on the C64, I can't remember if we had this on the Amstrad, but you could slap the spacebar to make it shout, Ghostbusters!
I remember the bouncing ball it had.
Bouncing ball, yeah. But,
yeah, so you could sing along.
Yeah, but when the bouncing ball, when it got to Ghostbusters, that's when you had to slap spacebar at the right time. Did it do it on the Amstrad? I can't remember.
I don't know.
And he did it on the C64. Yeah.
Mandela Effect. It really did catch the feel of the film. I played it on my Amstrad CPC, Neil did as well, and it came out for nearly every big 8-bit platform. The original was the C64, and you would have thought that if it came out in the C64, a port to the BBC Micro would be relatively easy, but it didn't happen. And that's now been corrected. And while, of course, Ghostbusters is in the news because they've had a reasonably successful reboot, sadly missing the original satire of the original, but it's still pretty decent, the two films. I'd have been about 11 at the time, and I did know that Ghostbusters, which doesn't really feel like a strategy game, that took me on the first steps in a lifetime playing them, that and perhaps Elite, because Elite was a bit of the same idea with equipping your ship and then going on with things. In fact, you could really argue it's not a strategy game, because certainly by today's standards, almost every game has strategy-like elements like that, but back then, most games didn't. So for me, it was a strategy element rather than the actual gameplay of catching the ghost, because that got very, very routine very quickly.
Would you call it strategy, or would you call it basic resource management, that resource being money?
You're really stretching to call it strategy. You're really stretching. It's a reach from me, but it had the strategy elements, and there was those elements that I latched onto, I think.
Yeah, because you'd start off the game with a certain amount of money in the bank, or it was a loan, wasn't it, from the bank? Yeah. You'd have to spend that on equipment to bootstrap your new small business, which was ghost busting. And then you go to work upgrading, earning money, trying to afford the hearse was the car that you really want. I seem to remember always starting off with a VW Beetle. And you had the little guy with the forklift truck putting things on the car. I really like that bit. There were lots of nice little touches in the game. You said catching ghosts got routine fairly quickly. I never fully got the hang of it. I always found it a little bit difficult. And then if you ever got to the Marshmallow Man bit where you've got to run through his legs or under his foot or whatever, that was really hard. I never could time that quite right. But you obviously got it down, did you?
Yeah, I didn't have that. Eventually, I didn't have that much difficulty playing the game. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it was the whole strategic thing, the whole getting better every time, that kind of thing that you then do in XCOM and other games that I really enjoyed with it.
Did you ever complete it?
Oh yeah,
you did?
multiple times.
What happens at the end?
It gives you a code that you can restart the game with more resources.
Oh, okay. So it just makes it easier, or does the game get harder?
No, it makes it. I don't know if the game does get harder. I can't remember that much. Yeah, but it does mean you can start with the best equipment. It's an innovative idea, that. But anyway,
I played it lots on my CBC, and it was a good game. I wouldn't say it was an incredible game. It was a good game, but then it was taken up a level because it was Ghostbusters, and that was so damn cool, and we all wanted to be a Ghostbuster. So that really spoke to me about the power of a well-chosen license for a game. It can really do that, because if you imagine the Ghostbusters game without the license, would we be talking about it today?
The imagination gap fills in. There's a lot of it. So it was a simple game. It wasn't too complicated. If it had been complicated, maybe it would have a better game, more in depth, but I wouldn't have played it. So for me to play this, it needed to be as simple as it was, with the basic elements that it had, and of course had that Ghostbuster thing to really grab you. So the BBC version has been made by Chris B over in Star.forums. He's got it needs a standard BBC with an enhanced version with, if you've got sideways RAM, the game is available there.
Trying to read here, Dave, from
I'm
the
just
forum.
making sure there's nothing specific that I need to tell people about it. But yeah, no, there's not. Go and get the game, play it on your BBC, and bust those ghosts.
Yeah, the link will be in the show notes.
Yeah.
Time now for our community question of the week. Dave, drum roll, please take it out of contest mode while I tell everybody what last week's question was. This was Dave and Chris were talking about the radio being used to broadcast computer code, but we want to know, what was the most interesting way that you've managed to get data onto your computer? Interesting one. So let me refresh this. Now it's out of contest mode. Of course, if you want to participate in the question of the week, you can head to reddit.com/r/This Week in Retro. And if you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/This Week in Retro. I think we did have a new patron. Did you mention who that was earlier, Dave? I think we missed that in housekeeping.
No, we have failed in our jobs, and I will rectify
our patron this week.
So our new patron is Hurry. Who has, I really liked his avatar, the little image he's got there. I don't know if it's a reference to Elite or if it's a reference to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. What's the link between those two?
Mostly harmless.
That's right, exactly what it says on it. It's a Guinness logo, mostly harmless on it. Either's fine with me, two wonderful things. So thank you very much, Hurry, for signing up. How can people sign up, Neil?
Well, as I said just a moment ago, Dave, if you were listening to me, patreon.com/This Week in Retro, where you can become an official twirler and support the show. There is a growing army of twirlers supporting us, and we really do appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. So, community question of the week this week. Oh, and also we'll be recording the second part of our Patreon exclusive Ask Us Anything after this show. So you'll get to see that if you become a patron. Okay, so I've read out the message, the question, and the top answer comes from Commander Coda. In the 1980s, I remember sticking a photodiode. Oh, we talked about this. Yeah. Photodiode into a rubber suction cup and pressing that onto my TV screen. One of the TV channels broadcast a flashing square on that spot, and this he used with his BBC Micro. Says they've tried to find out information about the show, and it might have been called Database. So I've come across Database, actually. I've seen that show. And they've also linked to a really good interview with Jeff Crammond on Database.
The Sentinel.
And then they found the instructions. So,
so Electron Ash was worried in one of his comments that he thought, is this the Mandela effect? Am I making this up? And he said, no, I'm not. And no, here's proof for you, Ash. Don't worry. It's real.
Yeah. Who's our next answer from, Dave?
Tungsten Orchid. And it says, while it's not terribly unusual, it was interesting. I bought a game collection for my C64 that came on a CD. It required me to use a converter that plugged into the cassette port. Neil, you're looking as if you might have heard of this before. That offered up an RCA port that the analog output from the CD player could be plugged into. The technology worked, and it was an interesting novelty for me at the time. A quick search online brought me this article. It looks like the same thing. He's linked to something in the C64 wiki, which will be. And Fiskett replies, "Didn't Neil do a video on this a few years ago?"
Yeah, so this was Rainbow Art's first edition, is what it was called. Someone on eBay a couple of years back had a bunch of new old stock, so I managed to snag myself one of these, and I did a video on it. So it's C64 games as audio tracks.
Yeah. So normally a CD-ROM would be data on there. It would be a stream of data your computer would use. Instead of this, it's a CD-ROM with data which is converted to analog audio, which is then converted back to data, losing masses and masses of the 700 megabytes, the potential in there. You probably end up with maybe 1 megabyte at the end of it.
However, because of it being a digital format and there's no degradation like you would get on a tape, it can actually load quite a lot quicker. There's a fast loader made to work with that. Likewise, there was one from Codemasters for the ZX Spectrum as well. So it's a really interesting bridge between actual CD-ROM and fake CD-ROM, if you like, audio CD-ROM. Our next answer comes from Session Pristine. 4977 says, I recall building a serial modem cable, stringing it out the window to link my PC up with another PC in the halls of residence at uni. My roommate would hang out his washing to dry on this cable. We started by using Laplink and later using NetWare Personal with a serial port network driver. Years later, I shared a flat with the same guy, and we had a full NetWare 3.12 server on Token Ring, along with a couple of PCs. My flatmate had a bunch of Sun workstations he borrowed from work, and we used an aging 386 running Linux to route between his Ethernet hub, my Token Ring, and the 2 megabytes or megabits per second BT box that provided our daemon internet. So a hacked together proxy server for their halls of residence. God, we went to great lengths, didn't we, to try and get internet access or multiplayer gaming or whatever.
It sounds so appealing. Doing what I can already do now, but in an incredibly difficult way, sounds so appealing. There is an answer. I want to read out a fourth one this week. Prefrim says, back in the 80s, we used my dad's ham radio to transmit a Spectrum loading screen from our house to my uncle's across town, which eventually loaded fine. As a kid, I linked 2 Spectrums up with a sort of LED light sensor arrangement at both ends, which I think was based on an idea in the Usborne Computer Projects book to send keystrokes over light back and forth. Terribly slow and prone to errors as no error checking. Amazing.
There you go. That's our pirate radio station idea. It's already been done.
Yeah.
Although on legal airwaves there.
Yeah.
Thank you. There are lots of answers. It's well worth having a read. Paul, a.k.a. Hermsky, talks about the Thompson Twin adventure game distributed on FlexiDisc on CMVG magazine. I have a copy of that. I don't remember at the time, but I subsequently bought it just because it's such a weird format. Pajako6502 talks about his ZX Spectrum games that he's now put on dictaphone tapes. He's got a mini collection of Spectrum games, which is really cool. Richard Shears has a modern answer. He talks about the GoTech. Interesting way, using a USB stick to play something on an Amiga is pretty weird when you really think about it. Any others stand out for you there, Dave?
Fiskett talks about a vague recollection of trying to squirt software he'd written down an USB cable onto the Wii. But I think that's just a choice of words that makes that interesting to me.
Moving on swiftly then. It's time for this week's Community Question of the Week, and it's a very simple one. We mentioned it earlier, so hopefully you've been thinking about it. What game made you change platform? What game made you change platform? So we talked about the impact of Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Ultima, or Ultima 7 specifically. What game was it for you? Let us know. I think this will be a really popular one. Reddit.com/r/this week in retro if you would like to participate. We tend to record on a Monday, so we do encourage you to jump on there and get your answers in Saturday, Sunday, Monday morning before we record so that we can get them. But even if you miss that, it still makes for really interesting reading when we go back and check over them. So do get involved in the subreddit. Become an official twirler if you'd like at patreon.com/this week in retro. And have a think about how you might like to wave at us if Duncan allows the waving video. Will there be a prize for the best wave?
Yeah, you can do them a mug. They can get an official Twine mug.
Yeah, this is really turning into something.
Yeah.
Best wave or different places where you've gone to record yourself waving. Most exciting place to wave at us from.
Yeah. We'll need to get to a certain number, though. I want to see the wall of waves.
Yeah, okay.
Wall of waves. There we go, the wall of waves.
Right, I think that just about does us for this week. So thank you as always for taking the time to listen. Lovely to hang out with you again, Dave. And take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
He's waving.
I'm waving. Neil's waving. You're waving too, I hope.
Unless you're driving.
Don't drive. Pull up so you can wave.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.